Hi.
Hi, can
Hi,
you hear
Alex.
me?
How are you?
Good, how are you?
Good. It's so good to see you.
Yeah, you too. Perfect.
Yeah, and just hi to everyone else joining. It's been exciting to
Yeah,
see how much so many others are looking forward to this talk as much as we are.
I know, I
Um,
agree.
so just to start, in case you're new to us, GoStork is the first fertility marketplace where intended parents find, compare, and connect with top fertility providers. And we're on a mission to bring transparency to the fertility industry and really to help simplify the first steps in the family building journey and really to help people make much more informed decisions about their providers. And we're 100% free to use. And so, as we're always trying to bring helpful insights and advice from the experts and those who have walked the path ahead of new intended parents on our platform, we love bringing amazing people like Alex onto our Instagram lives, really just to help educate and support you along the way. So, on that note, Alex, we are so thrilled to
Well,
have you
thank
today,
you.
as well as to have personally gotten to know you over the last few months.
I know,
You
it's been
know,
great.
I think it's a good start to National Surrogacy Awareness Month to have you here.
Yeah, I agree. I actually honestly didn't realize that it was Surrogacy Awareness Month until you were talking about it, because but I'm really glad that we could do this to talk about it.
I think you're doing so much to bring awareness. So it's
Thank you.
perfect to have you here. Yeah, and so just as a brief introduction, Alex has created Everybody Matters, a wonderful website and Instagram community, just supporting, advising, and inspiring so many patients and intended parents. And she has two boys, one through IVF, who's 4, and one through surrogacy, who's just 11 months. You look amazing, by the way. You don't look like you've lost any sleep.
Oh, thank you. Had to put on some makeup for today. Yeah, the second one's 11 weeks old, so it's crazy.
Sorry,
Yeah.
11 weeks.
Oh
Yeah.
no, that's okay. Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
but, it's been a long, hard infertility journey. And I think you've learned so many lessons along the way. And also learned how to be your own best advocate. So we're just so grateful to you for joining us. Like, it just goes without
Thank you.
saying that we really value you coming on to answer some questions. And on that note, just one more quick thing before we get started. People have been submitting questions for Alex, but if you're joining now and think of something you want us to add into the conversation, just use the little question icon on the bottom of your screen.
Hmm.
And, then we can try to fit it in if possible.
Yeah, perfect.
Great. So I guess, shall we? I'd love to just
Yeah, let's
dive in and
dive
get started.
in.
So just to start at the beginning, you know, when you were fairly young compared to many women, you had a feeling and then went on to discover that you'd have difficulty conceiving and carrying a pregnancy. And so you did this despite the fact that doctors encouraged you to wait. You know, what did that
Yes.
process of figuring this out look like for you? What was your situation?
Yeah, so in the very beginning when we had started, I was only 26 years old, and so the first doctor that I talked to when I felt like I went off birth control and I wasn't getting my period for a few months and I didn't know what to expect, but he just kept saying, "Wait for a year, I promise it's going to happen," the things that a lot of people just say, and I just really just didn't think something was right, and so basically I just went to a different OB and I went to people until I found someone that I thought was really listening to me, and she encouraged me to go to get my thyroid checked out, and she encouraged me to make an appointment for the fertility doctor because it was going to take a couple months even to get in there. And so that's kind of how the journey started. And I first found out I had a thyroid issue, and we thought that was the fix. But then I went to the fertility doctor, and I found out that my fallopian tube is blocked and one is compromised. And so that was I was really glad that we just listened to ourselves and advocated for ourselves, because we found out within, 9 months of trying that IVF was our only option. And I feel like if
Mm,
we had not listened to ourselves, then we could have tried for years before figuring that out. So I feel like for us, we just got lucky that there was actually some sort of answer in the beginning. But I also think that it's just important to advocate for yourself, and just kind of, if you think something's up, it's okay to find a new doctor that you think will listen to you.
absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think you learned a lot about that. And do you have any advice for others about kind of what to proactively ask and push for answers for?
Yeah, I mean, personally, I think that if you think something's wrong and you're not really getting answers and you're trying and nothing's happening, or if there's just something off, I think it's okay to ask for the different tests to be done earlier on.
Mhm.
Because they had told us that they didn't want to do those tests until it was until, I'd been trying for a year or more, and
Hmm.
the results would not have been different if I had waited a year or
Right.
more. And so I feel like I was really glad that I found a doctor that took us seriously and didn't think, oh, you're just young, so it'll just take time. He
Hmm.
believed that there might be something wrong, and we were right that there was something wrong. So I think, and he was just also realistic where he said, you could try an IUI because one of your tubes is compromised, not blocked, but you have like a 1% chance of that working. So I just like that he was realistic with us that IVF was our best option. And so we kind of knew
Yeah.
what to jump into right away. And so it made the decision easier for us, I think.
Yeah, I think it's such an important message. Someone was just commenting one of their biggest regrets was not, figuring it
Yeah,
out
I
early
saw that.
on. So I
Yeah.
think it's always good to share that and how you did so, even to younger women, if you know you want to be a mom and
Yeah.
you aren't quite ready or aren't there yet, you start asking early, if
Yeah.
you.
Well, I even think like even if your friends and family, because it's pretty common for them to be like, oh, don't worry about it so much. You're young. It's like
Hmm.
it doesn't matter what they think. It's you, it's your body, it's your family, and it's really up to you to decide what you want to look into.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And so how did it feel to have answers and to move into your, IVF cycle? Also, can you share like what went well or what you potentially didn't expect during that experience of your first round?
Yeah, so I mean, we were extremely naive going into it because it was the first thing we got told we had to do. I know a lot of people have much more unexplained situations leading in. So I think for us, having a
Mhm.
straight answer of IVF was the only option. We were kind of naive going in, but I think that overall it went really smoothly. Everything went well. Like we got really lucky because we got pregnant with our son the first time. I know that's not very common.
Mhm.
And I think at that point, we didn't realize how uncommon or how lucky we were that
Mhm.
that happened.
Yeah.
Um, I think there was some, not miscommunication, but kind of, I wasn't educated at all at that point because when it did work the first time, I thought, okay, I don't know if IVF works for everyone, but it worked for me, so it'll just work again.
Mhm.
So I had no idea that just because it worked the first time, that it might not ever work again at that point.
Mhm.
And so I think that I'm not I'm not necessarily sad at that point that I didn't know that because I think I was able to enjoy that pregnancy. But at the same time, then when we wanted to extend our family, it was different because I didn't have any idea what was ahead of us.
Right. So, I mean, it is so amazing that your first cycle worked, and the average is definitely
Yeah.
two or three or more cycles.
Yeah.
But yeah, it sounds like it wasn't explained to you that that was even, you know,
Yeah. Not
lucky
common.
at the time.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Well, the doctor
Um,
was like, "Oh, one and done. Okay." I was like, "Oh, okay."
as if
It's
that
just,
happens for everybody.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I guess we'll skip forward a little bit, like you said, to your second journey, which was entirely different.
Hmm.
And can you walk us through, like, just how did you get to that point where you ended up deciding to consider surrogacy?
Yeah, so for us, like just a very brief overview is that we had tried for a couple years. We went through, I think, 5 or 6 different cycles of either IVF full cycle or the frozen embryo transfers. For me, I had to wait a really, really long time between each transfer. So in 3 years, I only had 3 transfers. And so overall, though, I'd had a failed transfer. I'd had 2 miscarriages. My lining wasn't thickening. They had tried like everything they could. They found out a bunch of different new things that was wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And our fertility doctor just said, we can try one more time on your body, but I would really highly suggest that you start looking into surrogacy. And
Mm-hmm.
I think when we first heard that, we were a little bit blindsided because we didn't actually know we were there yet. We thought it was a possibility in the future, but I don't know. It was just kind of hard to accept at first.
Mm-hmm.
Like I remember a couple of days after he had said that, like I was at the gym because this was in when you could go in public. But I remember I was at the gym and I just started like bawling like on a machine, like in public, and I didn't even care just because I think it was like finally hitting me that like I wouldn't carry a child again.
Mm-hmm.
And that was honestly like really hard to process. But once I think there was like a grieving period for that, and we just had to really accept that that wasn't going to happen again. And then I think we just got to the point where we're like, we've been trying so hard, we've been through so much, we've experienced a lot of loss. At this point, the goal is not for me to carry the child, it's to have a healthy child. And that was just it. And so
Mm-hmm.
I think once we accepted that, and then we tried one more time and I had another miscarriage, we just thought I mean, at that point, I was like, I can't do this anymore. Like, I
Yeah.
can't experience any more loss. I figured at that point, I just assumed I would just keep losing the babies. So I was like, I can't do this anymore. So that's when we moved on to surrogacy because we just thought this is our actual, we've talked to a lot of people, we've talked to
Hmm.
ourselves. It's our absolute best chance of having a healthy child. And that's really the whole goal right now.
Yeah.
So, yeah,
Yeah.
so
I
that's why we
mean,
moved forward.
it's such a journey even just to get to the
Yeah.
starting point of the decision. It's
Yeah.
such a big decision to make, and I know that it was such a different journey to go through for you. But I guess just to start with one of the most important decisions you had to make once you decided to move forward with surrogacy was that you wanted to work with an agency, right? So,
Yeah.
so why did you choose to go that route, and like what criteria did you look for in finding your agency?
Yeah, so we talked to our doctor and he said the best option, most inexpensive and just easiest option is to go with a family member or a friend. However, that's a very big ask of a family member or a friend.
Hmm.
And at that point, like there's really no one, you have to have had a healthy child to be a surrogate, at least in most places. And
Yeah.
so all of our friends or family either didn't have children yet or weren't done building their own families or they were like past the age where they would be able to be a surrogate. So
Hmm.
we really didn't have anyone in our family that would meet that criteria, even just from the doctor's standpoint. But we also just felt like for us, it was the better choice to go through an agency and match with someone and just have that be our relationship with the person from the beginning.
Hmm.
And so when we were looking at agencies, I mean, I talked to you about this. I had no idea what we were looking at. Like
No one does it first. It's
yeah, I
hard.
mean, I did research. I did a lot of research on my own. I reached out to a lot of different agencies based on my experience with infertility and IVF and doctors. I had started to do this thing where I screened them by email, where I emailed a bunch of agencies, and if they responded quickly, I felt like, okay, they actually are already taking me seriously. And if they took too long to respond, I kind of crossed them off my list because I figured if they don't even want to respond now, then they definitely won't be responsive when it comes to
Hmm.
the actual part. And so, but really, like we only reached out to probably 5 or 6 agencies because I just had no idea that there were more available. And we settled on one. We got, you had to have a lawyer in it, and our lawyer came in from, like, we had his recommendation from a separate third party. And so he also recommended the same agency. So it's just kind of, a bunch of people recommended them. And so then we set up a meeting in person, and that's kind of when we made our final decision about what route to
Hmm.
go. I mean, in hindsight, I think that I I think I should have probably done. I mean, I was happy how obviously we had our son, but
Hmm.
I think there's a lot of questions and a lot of things that I didn't know. I know like even from looking at your guys' website, like there's so many more agencies that exist than I knew about.
Hmm.
And like at the time, like you guys didn't exist when I was looking at it, or you were, and so
Sorry.
I didn't, no,
Yeah.
no, no. I mean,
Yeah.
it's like people don't always know about the resources that are out there
Right.
either. And I feel like, um, so when I was looking at all the different agencies, it was like just kind of overwhelming. And I felt like we just had to kind of make a decision. And also, when you're going through infertility, all there is waiting. And so
Right.
you feel like, okay, well, I just need to make a decision. I just need to go with one. And like, we thought, oh, well, they'll all kind of do the same thing. I mean, that's not
Right.
the case in reality. But I think we just thought, like, okay, well, they have a good track record. They've been around for 30 years. They've had X amount of babies. They've had, whatever. And so I think we just thought, well, we'll talk to the owner and we'll see how we feel when we get there.
Right.
And
And I
so that's
think
how
you
it
had like
started.
a 2 hour long consultation call that
Yeah,
basically like they present
it was in
everything to
person.
you. And
Yeah,
then I think you
yeah,
said like because of how long you're waiting and you're waiting and you're waiting. So you finally
yeah,
get to one call. It's really long. You have tons of information handed to
yeah.
you. And then you didn't do any other consultations, right? Or
No.
yeah.
And so I think that's it. Like we met with the one agency. We were lucky that they were local and it was before COVID. So we met with them in person.
Hmm.
And but it was a 2 hour meeting. We really didn't know how any of the process worked before we met with them. And so, because there's some information online at that point, but like just not enough. And
Hmm.
so to hear 2 hours worth of information about surrogacy felt so overwhelming that even if we had questions, we were just exhausted and we were just like, okay, I guess this will be good. And so, it was trying to like, at that point we thought, well, they know a lot about it. I mean, we were just naive to the
One would
whole
hope, yeah.
process. And so because they were so, it seemed like they were so thorough about what they talked about that we thought, okay, this is good. We feel comfortable. The owner's super nice. Like
Hmm.
they seem very sympathetic to us. They seem like they were going to be very empathetic to both parties. And so it just seemed like the right move for us. And we had actually spoken to them before we did the final cycle for us. So we felt like we had time to think about it.
Hmm.
But we started to fill out the paperwork just in case things didn't work out, which I think to some people sounds pessimistic. But if you're in infertility, it's just kind of, you have to be realistic sometimes and be prepared for plan F. And so, yeah,
Yeah.
it's like you just have to be ready. And so we had already filled out paperwork for them and decided on them before we started our final cycle. And then when I had another miscarriage, we decided like, okay, we're going to move forward with them because we'd already done the
Right.
background information about them.
Was there
Yeah.
anything else you wished you had asked before you got started?
There are definitely questions like simple things that I didn't really think about is every agency has coordinators that work with, and the coordinator is responsible for coordinating between the intended parent, who is us, and the surrogate. And I didn't think of, okay, how many intended parents do you have? How many surrogates do you have? How many coordinators do you have? Is the coordinator working with 15 different people, or is she working with two?
Or
And
50?
50,
Yeah.
and it's like, is she going to give us individual attention, or is she going to send us a couple text messages once in a while? And I think those kind of questions are important because some agencies have been around a long time, but they're really big, and so it's almost turns out to be a little more corporate than you were hoping, versus a newer agency doesn't necessarily mean they're not good at what they're doing. They might actually have more individualized attention. So I think it
Right.
depends on what you're looking for, because I know even when we were matching, like we wanted to have a relationship with our surrogate, and then they matched us with someone who also wanted to have a relationship, but we saw some profiles where the surrogate did not want a relationship and she just kind of wanted to be more like a, not a business transaction, but it's like
Right.
she just wanted to carry the child, not have a relationship, not talk. But I think some intended parents like it that way as well.
Hmm.
And so I think it's just knowing what kind of relationship you want to have with the surrogate, what kind of relationship you want to have with the agency, if any, and also figuring out, okay, is the coordinator, like, what exactly is her job? Because I made assumptions about what their job is. I assumed
Hmm.
that as a coordinator, she would coordinate everything from start to finish, which at that our agency, just that wasn't the case. And so it's like, if I had a financial question, I had to reach out to the financial person. If I had a question about whatever, I had to like reach out to the different areas myself, which ended up being a little bit frustrating at times. And our surrogate had to do the same thing. And I thought the coordinator was supposed to coordinate between everything, but I think that that's how it always is for them. I just didn't know to ask those questions
Right.
before we started working with them. So, yeah, I think just knowing what kind of attention you're going to need and knowing what kind of support you're going to
Yeah.
need. Also asking, like, do you guys have a support system for the intended parents? Because they didn't. And they kind of said they did, but like it was more a therapist that was for both sides, but the therapist really was more for the surrogate than us. And so things like that, like, is there actually a therapist or someone that's designated just for the intended parents, or is that something that we should seek out outside of this? Because I think if we had known, we might have sought out more individualized things
Hmm.
for ourselves. And even like the therapist, what kind of relationship do you want her to have with the surrogate? What does the surrogate want? Like, does she want someone that she can talk to one on one, or does she like the group setting? Because for us, it was a group setting, no other option. And so it's like just knowing those questions of what you need, what your surrogate needs, what's
Right.
available, what's not available.
I
I
think
think
that,
because every agency is going to have a different options when it comes to that stuff, but they don't usually talk about that in the intro meeting because there's just so much other things to talk about.
yeah,
So,
I mean, these agencies are just doing such wonderful work, but they have so much information to share with you. And sometimes you
right,
go into the meeting not knowing what questions you'd want to ask, just to
right.
kind of make sure you're set up for the right relationship. And that's part of the reason why GoStork was created. So you can see
Yeah,
everything you need to know about an agency up front, and you can set up meetings with all your favorites instead of getting kind of, you've been waiting for so long and you go through a 2 hour long meeting and maybe you just decide,
yeah,
and then you might end up with surprises that you weren't really prepared
yeah.
for. So we're really trying to
And
add
I
that
think that's what
transparency.
happened to us. Yeah, and I think that's what happened to us. And like, obviously, we wouldn't change anything just because of having our son, but like, overall, the experience of it, I think that it would have been nice to have options and feel
Hmm.
like we would have felt more comfortable and more prepared and more secure in our decision if we had seen, everything laid out for all the
Yeah.
different things and talked to multiple places. But yeah, so it's definitely, if you have somewhere like your company that you can do some easier
Yeah.
research, that's definitely preferred.
And and you did talk about the emotional support component. So, um, I guess would you suggest that, an intended parent starting on this journey make sure that they set up themselves to have therapy in advance and, figure out what the agency offers them or their surrogate and
Yeah.
just make sure everyone's comfortable? Like, was that something that
Yeah.
you, yeah.
I mean, I personally think that I think it's a very personal decision. Like
Hmm.
what we wanted and what we needed may not be the same, but just from talking to some other potential intended parents and other people that are starting their surrogacy agency and even people who have done it before, I feel like, especially if you're going into it after going through infertility and the trauma of infertility, if that's what's leading you to surrogacy, I feel like setting up a support system for yourself is very important because I think we thought we could rely on the agency and, things like that for that support. And really the agency is there for the surrogate and the therapist is there for the surrogate, which I completely understand and I agree with because she's the one carrying the child and she needs that support. And I definitely think that needs to be there for her as well. But I
Hmm.
think that it's also important to recognize that the intended parents are also processing a lot of trauma
Yep.
and different grieving processes and
Yeah.
obviously we have so much feeling of joy going into it, but we also have a lot of anxiety. Like there was way more anxiety throughout the pregnancy than I expected, and so I think that was also because we couldn't see her in person and
Right.
but overall I think that it is important to make sure you have a support system, whether it
Yeah.
be family and friends that you talk to or a therapist that's on your own on the side or you know, whatever you need for the support, I think it's important to recognize that you deserve support also as the
Yeah.
intended parent.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I think it's so important. And I'm glad you, brought that up. But you've already talked about so many things so far. I just wanted to take it back 1 second. Oh, do we have someone here?
Oh, no, no.
Oh,
I'm
sorry.
just trying to put the pacifier in my son's mouth.
I thought we would have a little
Oh, that was my
11-week
husband.
old
He just
visitor.
walked by.
So
Yeah, yeah. He's taking a nap, so I'm trying to.
so just going back for a second though, I mean, one thing that was great that your agency did obviously was match you with your carrier who I think you have a great
Yeah.
relationship with, right?
Yeah, we do.
And
Hmm.
so what was that matching process like for you? Like they facilitated the meeting. I think this was before starting COVID, but
Yeah. Yeah, it
you
was.
agreed to move
Yeah.
forwards. You had to think about what you both wanted in the contract, right? Like, so
Yes.
what was that experience like and what decisions did you make?
Yeah, so for us, I feel like we found a lawyer that we could really trust. So that helped significantly with the contract part of it because he focuses just on surrogacy law. And so for him, it was a pretty standard thing. And we just kind of agreed to it. The contract ended up being really straightforward. I mean,
Yeah.
we had to go through it. But for the matching, they tell you most agencies will say it takes 3 to 6 months to match with it, which I think is pretty average. It only
Hmm.
took us 3 weeks to get matched. So that's also
Amazing.
where we're like, okay, well, this must be just what's meant to be because that's very uncommon.
Hmm.
And then we matched with her. So they gave us her profile, and then they also sometimes they're only able to give you one profile depending on how many intended parents are there and how many surrogates there are. But we were able to see a few different profiles, which was helpful just to make us feel comfortable with our decision. And so then you basically decide, okay, I'm comfortable with, they show you the profile of someone on paper. You say, yes, I want to meet this person. Then they talk to her and her family and they say, yes, I also want to meet them. And so
Hmm.
both sides agree to meet. And then we went to we got to meet with them in person because we were lucky. A lot of people don't live near
Hmm.
the surrogate necessarily, but we only live about 45 minutes away from each other. So we were able to meet at the agency because it was also pre-COVID. And
Hmm.
then we met with them, had like, again, like a couple hour conversation with them. They told us why they did it. We told us why, we just heard a lot about each other. And I feel like we just immediately felt comfortable with her and like it just felt right
Hmm.
away. And they told us to take the night, and both parties, like them and us, called by first thing the next morning saying, let's move forward. And then there's she has to go through medical clearance, and then there's the legal clearance of the contract, and then,
Right.
there's just a bunch of steps leading up to just the transfer. Our doctor also mandated an ERA cycle, where they test the lining before, and so she had to do that cycle before we started. But we matched in October, and then she had her first actual cycle in February by the time everything was ready. Yeah. And so that's a process just to get there.
It is.
Yeah.
But still, I mean, it's just, amazing that it all worked out in the end, of course.
Yeah.
And moving on to, I guess, joining your gestational period, her appointments.
Yeah.
And you've written an article featured on GoStork about this.
Yeah.
When we first met, I think we kind of bonded over this topic, but
yeah.
I know it felt so different to be on the sidelines. You used to be the patient, and now you're sitting and watching, and it's almost like what the husband feels like or something, like
I know that's what
how different was that, and tell us about that, and what you would tell other intended parents that maybe have moved on to surrogacy but might not expect what it would feel like.
Yeah, so I think that was actually the most surprising thing to me in the very beginning. And again, I think it depends on how you get to the surrogacy point. Like, it depends why you're exploring surrogacy. But for us, because it was, because I couldn't get pregnant and stay pregnant again, and because we had had years of the infertility experiences, I think it was just very strange because we used the same fertility doctor. Like, we got to choose the fertility doctor. We had frozen embryos that was at that doctor. So we used the same doctor. And so the first time she went to start getting her medical clearance, I would go with her because it was pre-COVID. And I remember the very first time that I went to an appointment, I just went alone with her just because we wanted her to feel comfortable and not have too many people at the appointment. But I remember standing in the side of the room, like standing next to her as she was being examined. And my doctor came in and just completely did not acknowledge that I was standing there. And like, he was talking to her as the patient, but it wasn't even like, oh, hey, how are you? I don't know. It was so weird. And it's very his personality. Like, he's just kind of go in, do the job, get out kind of doctor,
business,
which I think is part of what, he really is. We trust him as a doctor. And so we know that there's not the warm and fuzzy with him, but it was just very strange. Like, some of the nurses, there was one nurse in particular that was always very kind, and she acknowledged me and said hi. But I think the weirdest part of it was that I just felt like I was on the sidelines to our own child and it was very weird. And I went from being the patient for so many years to just being this person in the room that nobody's paying attention to. And so that was kind of strange. And I remember going home to my husband that night, and I was like, this is I was actually kind of upset about it. And I said, I know this is crazy, and I know I don't want the attention on me anymore, and it's fine not to be the patient, but I just wanted to be acknowledged that I was there, and I wanted him not to ignore me. And my husband's like, yeah, welcome to my life. So it was just kind of interesting because I never thought about it from that perspective before. Like, that's always how it was for him. He was always the person on the sideline. He was always the person nobody paid any attention to, even though it was equally his child and his journey. He was just there, standing there. And so then I feel like throughout the surrogacy journey, like throughout the pregnancy and everything, it's this unique experience where I got to experience it in exactly the same way as him.
Right.
And so I feel like that's very like, no way we would have been able to have that experience otherwise. But like, we just had the same experience where we both were having the same experience. We both couldn't go to doctor's appointments at a certain point. We both weren't the one that was the patient. And so I think it was just kind of interesting to experience it from his point of view too. Yeah. And that like, kind of helped me like understand him.
Understand how he felt with you before.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And like, it was a little different where, when I was pregnant with our first son, he could still feel the kicks from the outside at a certain point and like see the changes of the growth and everything. But there was still this disconnection like throughout the first part of it and throughout all of the parts where we were trying for our second, where I was just always the one in the doctor's office, and he was always just the one that had to sit there and watch. And so I think it made me realize it's also hard to be the support person because he felt like he had even less control than I did during that. And then once we moved into the part where we were both not in control, it was like, okay, I can't control her body. I can't control mine, but it felt like I had some control. But like, I can't control her body. I can't control anything about this. So I think that was just kind of a big moment for us realizing that we just had to let go of that
It's
control a little bit.
emotional journey to let go of that control, but
Yeah.
it's worth it in the end. But it is
Yes.
hard to get there. You just have to know that's ahead of you.
Yeah.
You know, and it's such a good kind of segue into just like how your relationship evolved with your carrier. I mean, I think
Yeah.
you became really good friends, and just love to
Yeah.
know like what that was like. If any favorite memories along the way.
Yeah.
Bonus points for tips for great gifts to give your surrogate
Yeah.
to show
Yeah.
support. I know you did a really good
Yeah.
job at
So
that from what I saw.
thank you. Well, yeah, so like we went along, I think it helped that I was able to actually see her in person a little bit before COVID hit.
COVID, yeah.
We had done, so we had like seen each other in person. We had had like breakfast together. We, it was just things where we
Oh.
got to actually talk in person, and
Just
that was
thinking
the
about going out to
relationship.
breakfast is like
Yeah, I know.
another world to me
I
now.
know.
Like,
It's like,
what
oh,
is
like let's
brunch
just go to the
like?
bagel place and sit there.
Remind me
But
what
I
brunch
think
is.
yeah, I know. But I think it was where we were just really like I think that we it helped our relationship a lot that we were able to meet in person, talk by ourselves for like an hour or whatever, and just leading up. And then but when she started the cycle for our son, COVID restrictions basically started like the week that the transfer, a couple weeks before the transfer, like when she started medications. So starting when she had her monitoring appointments, like we were not allowed to go there anymore, and we weren't allowed to go to
Mhm.
the transfer, and we weren't allowed to go to a single appointment throughout the entire process. So I think that our relationship, she helped and we helped a lot by we would just decide, okay, it's going to be easier on you and us if you just take a video when you're at the appointment. So when it was normal appointments, she would just take videos, which helped us a lot because we felt like we were getting that confirmation that he was okay, and we were,
Mhm.
seeing him that way. And then we would do FaceTime during the bigger appointments, like the 20-week scan and things like that. But then I would actually go a lot of times and meet her outside of the appointment just to say hi for 5 minutes,
Oh,
because then I just felt like I could at least
so
see her a
sweet.
little bit. And and then we met at a park outside like once or twice, but then it just kind of started to be things started to shut down again. It just didn't feel like I wanted her to be protected and I wanted him, our baby, to be protected. And so we just kind of didn't really see each other much at all in person except for a very brief meetings. But overall, we would text like I'm a texter, she's a texter. So we
Mhm.
just figured out a communication that worked for us. Like I think for some people, they really like to see the carrier in person. They like to do FaceTime. Like I think it's just figuring out whatever you feel most comfortable with and the both of you do. And like for
Right.
us, it was texting. And so she has two young children. We have another son, and so I think she liked that I understood that she wasn't always available 24/7 and that she was
Yeah.
busy with her kids too. And so I think just because of our older son and because of her two kids, the texting is what worked best for us. But I mean, we would text like back and forth a ton. And so I think that's the way we bonded the most during it.
Mhm.
And then right before, probably like within a couple weeks of giving birth, I was able to meet her outside of an appointment, and we actually ended up standing outside talking for like 45 minutes. And I think for us, we just felt like we finally like we had that connection again in person, and we just felt really
Mhm.
good going into the birth. And so that was really important to both of us. And at that point, she was talking about an induction date, and like it was nice to be able to talk to her in person about that. So I think even that kind of lifted our spirits to be able to see each other in person
Mhm.
with masks, 10 feet away
Yeah.
from each other. But yeah, I think that helped a lot because that's kind of solidified how we were feeling about everything. And we were able to kind of talk things out in person that we hadn't been able to discuss.
Mhm.
And then that led us into her giving birth. So
And I
yeah.
think you said it was like Mother's Day during her pregnancy, and you
Oh yeah, so for
sent
the
something
gifts,
cute,
yeah. So
right?
Mother's Day, so she did her cycle in March, and the transfer was like mid-April. And so
Mhm.
we Mother's Day was when she was early on in the pregnancy, and so I had sent her like a Starbucks gift card because we couldn't see her. And I think she said that just like meant a lot to her because she could, get some food and get a treat or something for herself. And it was just like little things like that along the way that I just wanted her to like feel like we were thinking about her and we were
Yeah.
grateful. And then at the very end, they suggest like giving, like it's just kind of common. I don't know, like we learned along the way that and we always expected to without even being told. Like it's really nice to be able to present or give them a gift at the birth, like after the birth. And so that's the main thing that we were also thinking about. We ended up giving her like a birthstone necklace for him because we just figured like none of her kids are December babies. So we figured like that would be a special thing for her to
Perfect.
have. And we wanted to so we gave her that for her, just for her. And then we also wanted to give them something that would benefit their whole family. So we gave them gift cards to Disney. It's closed right now here, but like we
Yeah.
figured when it opens, or like even, getting little Disney toys, or like getting anything, there's so much that you can get in that. And they've never been to Disneyland. So we thought like, hopefully if it opens up again, like they can go experience that. And so I think for us, we just wanted to be thoughtful of, we wanted to get her something just for herself, but we also wanted to involve her family because they were all involved in the process and they were
Right.
all there for her. So, yeah, so I think that was important to us too.
Yeah, that's so sweet. And it is so important for the surrogate to have all the support that she needs from,
Yeah.
family. So,
Well, and like her husband he was out, he's in the, Marines. And so, but he wasn't home for the majority of the
oh,
pregnancy. So I think for that also is, he got back about, I think 6 weeks before she gave birth or something. And so
wow.
I think for that, like we also felt like we wanted to give her that added support because she was pregnant with our child and had two young kids at home and she was by herself. And so we just kind of wanted to help. She lives on a base, so she had that support, but it was still like, we just wanted to give her as much support as we could from a
Yeah,
distance.
wow.
So
She's an
yeah,
amazing person, obviously.
yeah,
Um, and so, one more thing you had to do, obviously, before the delivery was the birth certificate, which you worked
right.
with your lawyer on. So, for someone new to this process, like, what did that look like for you and being in California and everything?
Yeah, so for us personally, California is a very surrogacy friendly state. And so we were able to, and again, like our lawyer does this all the time. And so it helped a lot because he was able to like send us the forms, we filled them out, and we actually had our parentage documents by like halfway through the pregnancy, which means that
Hmm.
when the baby was born, we were going to be on the birth certificate. And so that that makes the whole process much smoother if you're living in a place where it's legal and it's easier in that way because you can file with the court. The court makes it easy. It's like a pretty straightforward thing. Yes, you're the parents. Yes, there's legal, like they see the contract, they see it's legally our baby, and so that made the whole process a lot easier. And so when like they had to submit the forms and stuff to the hospital and we had to check up on them to make sure they had everything they needed in advance. But overall, I think it went super smoothly. And then we were able to be on the birth certificate from the beginning. Whereas I know a lot of countries and a lot of other states don't have that friendly. Like I know another person that it took them like if you're living in a state where it's not legal or not legal, but like some places it's not. And so if you're in a place where you can't get the parentage documents ahead of time, then you have to adopt your own child, which is kind of
Hmm.
strange. And so I think it just depends where you live and it's a whole different process. But for us, we felt very grateful that we could take care of all of that before he was born because that's an added
Yeah.
level, I'm sure, of stress afterwards. So we were
Yeah, and
grateful.
it's just another reason it's so important to do your research ahead of time and
Yeah.
engage with a lawyer that you trust and that will really inform you and work with you and everything. And the surrogacy agency
Yeah.
should help educate you on a lot of this.
Yeah.
So,
And I think actually that's why a lot of people end up going with California agencies and a California surrogate, even if they don't live there, because they get to be the parent, they get to do the parentage documents from the beginning, even if they're not in that state. And so I think if that's important to you, like you kind of have to weigh the pros and cons of do I want to work with a surrogate that's local to me if I'm not in a state that's friendly to it? Or do I want to work with a surrogate that's in another state and travel so that the process of it is more simple and straightforward? So it's just kind of weighing the pros and cons of those options.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Perfect. And then so moving on to having your baby.
Yeah.
So I know that, it was just an amazing experience. One of the best parts was the labor and delivery, I think. Even
Yeah,
though it was
it
during
was.
COVID and there's restricted access and everything, but you were able to accompany your carrier, I believe, and just
Yeah.
love to hear about that. And I just want to say we know some people have been asking questions. I'm going to get
Yeah,
to them
but
at the end, I
yeah,
promise.
I know. I
Yeah.
was just looking at them and I want people to
Yeah.
know we're not ignoring your questions. We will
Yes.
talk about them at the end. Um, and yeah, I think for us, like the birth, I was very anxious going into the birth. I mean, first of all, like if you've gone through the trauma and the loss, sorry, he has a blanket in his face. If you've gone through the trauma and the loss of everything, like, I don't know, we couldn't really take a deep breath until he was born. But I think there was that anxiety, but there was also the anxiety of like 2 months before our agency said, oh, well, you both probably can't be in the room and we're going to try to get one of you, like one of us had to be in the room because we had to take him. And so,
Yeah.
but like, I know that's not even the case everywhere. And so there's just a lot to figure out. And so my husband and I just decided we're not going to stress about that aspect of it. We can't control it. We're just going to see, like, when it gets closer, we'll talk to people and we'll figure it out. So we actually ended up getting in touch with like a head nurse in the labor and delivery because I don't know, I'm someone like I know our agency was doing things, but I really like to be proactive on my own. And I felt like I just had to know.
Advocating
I
for
had to,
yourself,
yeah,
right?
like I had to advocate and I had to talk to her myself. Like I had to know from her directly how it was going to work. And so we're actually lucky because my brother-in-law is a pediatrician that rounds at the hospital. So he like knew exactly who to talk to. So I didn't have to do that research. But so I got in touch with her and she was so nice. Like we also, the agency recommended a hospital that was near both of us that was very surrogacy friendly. It's not necessarily like as crowded as some of the other hospitals. They try to give the intended parents their own room once the baby's born. You know, it's like they try to just respect the process a lot more. And so for most people, if you're giving birth yourself to your own child, you can have one support person in most of these hospitals right now. Like most people have their significant other in there with them. For us, they said that she could have a support person and then one of us originally could be in there. But then when we talked to them, they said it's really up to the doctor, the OB who's delivering. And he was super surrogacy friendly. And he's like, oh, of course, this is a different situation. I don't want both parents not to be there. It's the birth of your child. So he was just so understanding. And so it ended up where I was able to be in the room throughout the whole labor, and then her husband was in there with us. And so the three of us spent the whole day together. And then my husband was able to be put in the waiting room, which probably hadn't been used for a year. And they just kind of put him there alone. And then we called him in like within 30 minutes of the birth, just to come in. But it was just a really special day. And I'm actually going to be doing like a whole longer post on the whole birth story at some point. But basically, it was just a really wonderful day. I got to spend the whole day with her and her husband. I got to talk to them. I felt really kind of not in control, but I felt more comfortable because I was seeing when the nurses were coming in. I was hearing everything they were saying. I was able to communicate that with my husband. I didn't have to come through anybody else. I like was witnessing it firsthand. And then then we got to, so, you know, the day progressed along. And when it got to the birth, the doctor was rushing over and I was able to say like, please go get my husband, you know, like don't forget about him. So I don't know if people would have remembered. And so that was kind of nice too. And then it just kind of it went, you know, I think this happens with anybody giving birth, but like the first part of the day felt really slow and it was kind of slow moving, but we were able to talk and bond even more. And then the last couple hours just like flew by because it was a lot of things were happening. She was getting the epidural, things, you know, her water was broken, things were happening. And then we were standing there and she only had to like push twice and he came out into the world. So that was just, it was just really crazy.
That's a good experience.
Yeah. And so, and like, I think it was also really insane for me because I was standing kind of to the side because we were trying to respect her privacy too, in certain ways, you know, but I saw like, just as his head came out and I think I gasped and I just couldn't even, and I just started crying. Like I just started like bawling immediately because I was like, oh my God, that's actually him. Like he's a real baby. Like I think, I don't know. It's like you go through all
and
this
it was
and you
only
know he's
11
real.
weeks ago. It's crazy.
Yeah. Yeah. And like,
So
you know,
amazing.
it's going to be real. And it was also like, he was born on my birthday. So there was like this whole thing, like, I don't know, it just felt like so special. And then, but like he came out and then, you know, he started crying and like my husband and I just looked at each other and we're like, that is the sound that we've been waiting all these years to hear, you know? And so it was just very, very special. And then we ended up spending about an hour or two in the room. Like they put him on me first and then like my husband but we stayed in the room with our surrogate for a couple hours so that she could, like, she also held him and like her husband held him. And it was just really special because it was just kind of the four of us with him. And then she was starting to get ready to kind of recover, and we were ready to kind of move into the room. So, we said our goodbyes. We walked out of the room and into another room with him. And I remember talking to our surrogate afterwards, and she just said, like, watching us walk away as like a happy family meant like everything to her. Like, she just said it was one of the most incredible experiences, seeing how happy we all were. And then she was actually such a trooper because she had a really good birth and everything went well. And she actually was released like an hour later to go home. So
Oh my gosh. Wow.
so she said it was really weird, like, go to the hospital, have a baby, go home.
Go home.
So, and we stayed the night, but
You
just
often want to
because,
stay as long as you can after.
I know. Well, and
Wanted
she
to.
really just wanted to go home. And
Yeah.
so I
She has
think she was
kids.
ready to
Yeah.
be with her family. Yeah. And
Yeah.
just move forward. But yeah, so it was just a wonderful day, and it was just a really wonderful experience. And then I've kept in touch with her. I send her like videos and photos regularly, and she really likes seeing that and seeing how he's growing. And so I think that's really special too.
Oh, that's just an amazing bond.
Yeah.
I think it's also like maybe not everyone realizes that some hospitals are much more surrogacy friendly or much more experienced
Right.
with that delivery relationship. So
Yeah.
it's good
Well, and
to
that's what,
know,
like,
to think you can look into that and ask about it when you do the
I
hospital
think that's
visits.
important to, like, even if, like, whether you're doing it independently or going through an agency, or whether the agency is experienced or not, and knowing the hospital, I think knowing which hospitals are friendly, because like the hospital that we gave birth to our first son in would have not worked out, because they're the most popular, like, high rated whatever hospital in our area, which is great for normal births, but nobody else would have been allowed in that hospital. They're already overcrowded as it is, because so many
Right.
people go there to give birth. And so I think just knowing, like, where you trust, a place that is experienced, even certain things like finding an OB that won't forget that the surrogate is not the mother. Like, she didn't have to deal with him constantly thinking that she was the mom, which I think
Mm-hmm.
helped emotionally for her and us. And then when we were at the hospital, they kept referring to me as the mom, which I really
Good.
like. I thought that
Yeah.
was very respectful. Like, I
Mm-hmm.
think that other hospitals might keep asking her about, like, her baby, and
Mm-hmm.
we didn't want to have to keep reminding them what the situation was. So it was very nice not to have to remind them of that, and just to
Right.
have everyone know our situation and to respect it and to understand it. It made everything
Yeah,
go
and
much
just
more
like
smoothly.
they have so many people throughout the day, they just call you mom. They don't call you by your name. So
Yeah.
it would be so hard
Yeah,
to hear
exactly.
the wrong person called mom. It's something people don't even realize. But yeah, I think that's
Yeah.
so
Well, I
important
think
to research your
one
hospital.
nurse came in and she's like, "Okay, mom," and she's like, "Nope, that's the mom." And I
Yeah.
was like, "Okay, thank you." So, it's
Good
just like,
job.
overall, though, everybody knew who to go to. Like, we had to have some questions about after the birth, and the nurse didn't even, she just came straight to me. And so I think, like, things like that, of having a place that respects that, made a huge difference in just making it
Right.
feel like special, and not, I didn't feel like I was being pushed off to the side, just,
Yeah. Or you're like,
so it's
hey,
just
it's
nice.
me. I'm the mom over
Yeah, like,
here.
I'm the
Yeah.
mom. Yeah. So yeah, that made a huge difference too. So
That's,
yeah.
I'm so glad you had that experience.
Yeah.
So I wanted to get to, before we continued, one of the questions we've had submitted during this call and even
Yeah.
before, just, all in all, this is an expensive journey. I think
Yeah.
we're all aware of that. It's not just surrogacy, it's IVF, it's, egg
Yeah.
donation if you need that, sperm donation. It can be so many things combined. So there's all sorts of different total journey
Yeah.
costs, but surrogacy itself often costs over $100,000. It depends on
Yeah.
the agency you go with. So, first, people wanted to know your kind of answer, like, how did you afford this or finance it, if you're okay to talk about that. But I can also share some tips too.
Yeah, well, I think overall, like, for us, I think it just completely depends. Like, I know that a lot of times that's why people go independently, and that's why, like, the most ideal situation is if you have a family or friend that can do it, because the costs will be significantly lower because you're not paying an agency. Like, you still have fees, like lawyer fees and things like that, but it just kind of depends what you're
But
going
you do
through.
have to think about the
Um,
risks of that too. Like, there's a lot of
Right, that's the
complications,
thing. That's
a
the
lot
thing.
of
Like,
complications.
it
Yeah.
seems easier because you may not have, like, the as much fees to the agency. You might not have, like the because obviously, like in California, you're allowed to compensate the surrogate, and so, and I believe they absolutely deserve to be compensated. And so I think it definitely makes it less complicated to go the route where it's all set out because, and you have the contract and everything like set in stone, because otherwise it just becomes like, I don't know, there would have been different levels of anxiety with that, I think, in different ways. In terms of like affording it, like for us, we were very grateful. Like we were able to kind of pull, like we had a lot of friends and family that like pitched in and helped kind of like pull resources. We knew a little bit in advance that this would be there's a chance that this would happen. So we had some time to start like putting things aside and saving things. And like, I think for us, we were just extremely fortunate that we had people that helped us, you know, like I know for a lot of people that is not a possibility. I think this is one of the things that makes me like the most angry about it, is that it's just not feasible for a lot of people because of cost. And I hate that people aren't allowed and able to build their families just because they have the cost barrier to things, you know? And so I think also there's a lot of resources out there for like helping to save money for things. And like, I know there's a lot of grants also that people can apply to. Like there's so many, like there's so many of them, and some of them specifically like help out with surrogacy, but also just with any part of your journey, and anything helps. And so I think I would definitely recommend like for people, if they know they're going to be going that route, like to one, start trying to save and like put things aside. I know that's not always possible. But also to look into like all the different grants and all the different things that are possible out there, because there are a lot of different programs out there that you can apply to and find.
Yeah, and we actually
supportive.
have an article on GoStork about financing surrogacy.
Oh, that's perfect.
We have a list of grants that are out there that you can apply for, and we link off to all of them. Also information about loans, so you can take out fertility loans. We're actually fairly soon in the process of launching our own product that will help people match with fertility loans. So not only helping them match with their surrogacy agencies and egg donors, but also loans to help finance and support you along the way.
Yeah,
so
well,
really
the fertility loans
but there's also, I mean, a lot of people do crowdfunding. Like, don't get me a birthday or Christmas gift or anything else. Everybody contributes. So there's a lot of options and like creative ways that people go about getting this covered. And I think check with your workplace, your HR department, because there might be benefits that you're not aware of. Or like advocate to them to add benefits. So there's ways, if you're determined to do it, you can look into a lot of options. Don't just give up before you get started.
Yeah, well, like we had so my husband's company, when we had started the IVF journey for the second time, like we found out that they did have some benefits for IVF coverage, and then we exhausted those options. So we thought that we didn't have anything left, but we then found out that they had a separate surrogacy help. And so we didn't even know that existed, and we wouldn't have known if he hadn't asked and looked into it. And so that helped a lot too, like anything, you know? And so like, it was a chunk that it's like, it helped us move forward faster, like just because there was this little bit of help from or a good amount of help that we didn't know existed before. And like, I think the crowdfunding is great. I think the looking into the loans, like that's like so important. I think it's just crazy because I know that's kind of scary for people sometimes, just because you're going into more debt. But at the same time, I think like you're saying, if you're coming out with information and articles about it, like there are places that are more reputable and places that are more trustworthy when you want to look into however you need to fund everything.
And I think like a lot of workplaces are starting to realize that people expect this, and to really hire and retain top talent, especially women in senior levels. You want to support infertility just as much as you support the normal pregnancy and labor and delivery journey. And I think people are advocating for it more. You're seeing many, many more employers have special benefits for this. Even if it's like in a huge employee manual you get at the beginning, you might not be aware, but go ask and advocate for it, and it'll drive more companies to support. And even like our founder, Iran, you know, he's gay, and when he went to have a baby through surrogacy, he wasn't necessarily going to get any benefits, but he did go push, and he ended up getting a whole paternity leave, which wasn't going to normally be given to him. So even just like the paternity leave for gay men having a baby through surrogacy is something that I just did a post about
I actually just did a post about like parental leave and like in general, that surrogacy really showed me like that everybody deserves that leave and
Yeah.
that you do have to ask for it and push for it. But like, it's crazy to me that, yeah, that like he wouldn't have gotten, like, they're equally the parents and like they're two men. So what, like they both have to go back to work after like a week? Like, that's not fair. And
Right.
so I think that all of that, there's just so much to that too. And I think the biggest takeaway with all of this is like, you have to advocate for yourself throughout the entire process. Like, I think it can get exhausting for people. I understand that it can get exhausting to continue to do it, but it's just so worth it to keep
Hmm.
advocating for yourself and fighting for yourself, because even if you're working with an agency, even if you're working with people that you trust, nobody knows exactly what you want better than you do. And so I feel like pushing for it, I mean, I would do things like, sometimes I thought maybe I was stepping on the toes and like maybe I should step back and just
Do
let
it.
things
Hmm.
happen. But then I was like, no, this is my baby
Hmm.
and this is our journey. And like, not on the, I was completely respectful for our carrier and everything like that. But like, if I was getting miscommunication from our agency, then I just directly talked to our carrier about things, like, because I was like, this is crazy. Like, we have to talk to each other about it. Or like, I wanted to talk to the doctor about things, So I think it's just advocating for yourself and not being afraid to speak up for yourself throughout the process is just really makes things go more smoothly and it gave me peace of mind and made me feel like I had a little bit of control.
Yeah, I mean, you have to do it. And I think you're such a good example of that. And, speaking of that and of leave when you have a new baby, I think
Yeah.
that's kind of perfectly goes into one of the questions we had was just about, adjusting to life with the little one. And,
Yeah.
you're also supporting your, what is it, 40,000 followers who are, following your journey, but also like feeling supported from what you've gone through before and helping them through their own infertility. So you're just really, I just think it's just so, you've been so honest and shared so much. I think it's really brave and inspiring. And
Thank
you're
you.
doing that while, now you're home with a new baby. So, um, just how are you managing everything and like who is your village? Two can feel
Yeah.
like five, right? So
Yeah.
going from one to
Yeah.
two
Well,
is a
I
big
know.
change.
Yeah, I think it's a big change too, because like our first son is 4, and so he has been completely used to all of the attention and,
Hmm.
not sharing the attention of us. And so he's just so sweet though. Like we talked a lot about Dylan, like leading up to it, the baby, and like we talked a lot about him, and like we talked to our older son the whole time. And so he was really excited about it. And so he's just overall like, there's obviously moments where he's jealous or there's frustration, but I think overall, like, he's doing really well. Like, he cares about him. He always wants to know how he's doing or how his day how his day is going. Like, he'll ask how the baby's day is going.
Hmm.
And
So
so I
cute.
think yeah, so I think adjusting to it, like, my husband's working from home, which helps. He usually still can't like come always, like, he has meetings and stuff, but like, it's even if it's a 5-minute help, like right now, our older son is sitting with him. So it's like things like that, just very helpful. And then I think it's just kind of finding a new rhythm. Like, I was so overwhelmed when we brought home the baby. Like, I feel like it's crazy because I know that people obviously, like, you're waiting for it so desperately, and like you feel like you don't have the right to have any of those normal feelings that people have when they're new parents sometimes. But at the
Hmm.
same time, I think everybody has a right to feel that way, and it's totally normal to feel overwhelmed, whether it's your first baby or second baby or more. And I think for us, it was just kind of finding a rhythm of, you know, they say like love grows. I have just as much love for both kids. That wasn't what I was concerned about. It's the attention part that I was nervous about. And so
Hmm.
I think just figuring out how to balance when the baby needs things, because it's like most of the time he needs to be held or fed or changed, or it's just always things happening. And then also leaving time to play and pay attention to our
Be
4-year
with
old
Dylan.
and read to him, and yeah, and make him feel good. And so we're kind of we were very careful. We didn't see anybody else for the first like 6 weeks until the baby got shots, just with COVID and everything. We just didn't want to risk anything. We still see very few people. We've just been very pretty much like staying at home, not seeing a lot of people because of everything still
That's
going
true.
on. But we had started to, like, just open it up a little bit and see like very immediate family in certain situations, just to get like just so that our son can be around other
New
people and
people.
play with other people and get attention from other people. But also I think with me and my husband, we've just kind of found a rhythm of, you know, he's extra helpful during the weekends because he knows that I don't really have a break between them during the week. And so I think overall it's just finding a new rhythm. And I
You'll
think
get there.
that's
It's
the
still
case.
so early.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. Well, I think, and we're starting to find it. It's like, you know, the baby's starting to take some naps during the day, even if it's like, you know, in a little bassinet downstairs or something. And I think that helps because then our older son gets that time. And like, I don't know, I think you find like random things. Like we found that Dylan, the baby, really likes car rides. Like he'll fall asleep. And so I'll feed him right before we'll go for a car ride somewhere. We'll come home and then he'll still be asleep. So I'll let him sleep in the
Yeah. Just drive to
car
nowhere.
seat.
It's COVID.
Yeah, like we'll just drive
Yeah.
around and then we'll like go through the drive-through car wash. My son really likes that. And then
So fun.
and then like we'll come back home and the baby will be asleep in the car seat and I'll have him just like sitting near us. And then it gives me 20 minutes or 30 minutes just to read with our 4-year-old. And so even things, you know, finding random things like that that just work for you and help us adjust and give both of them attention. So
Yeah.
yeah, I think that's it.
Doing great. It's amazing. So before we wrap up, just any final words of wisdom, advice, inspiration, what have you, for intended parents who are just really at the very starting point, like of embarking on this
Yeah,
journey that you've already walked. So like they haven't found their providers yet. They're just getting started.
yeah.
What would you say? And you have a great, one of your Instagram posts I like is like a dear younger self sign. And I know
Oh yeah,
younger
yeah.
is
We just
like
did
a
that with
year or two ago, but
yeah,
there are so many things I would tell myself to do differently, or
yeah,
maybe to worry about more, or worry about less. But well,
yeah.
you know, what would your advice be?
Yeah, so I mean, I think that overall my advice would be like the advocating for yourself is a really big one for me. I think that I'm not someone I don't really have a problem with confrontation, but a lot of people do. And so I think that just not being afraid to advocate for yourself. I think being able to do your research, and I think probably one of the biggest takeaways for me was this is probably the most impossible thing to do during infertility, but trying to be patient. And I was not patient at all. But I think just especially if you're going into surrogacy and you're going to try to be like an intended parent and match with a surrogate, I think it's so hard not to try to rush into things. And I feel like obviously it worked out and we were happy with how things went. But I think that we could have taken more time to look at different agencies and just like look at different things leading into it. But we had already been waiting for this child for so long that we just felt like we just needed to go for it. And my husband is significantly more patient than me. Like I think it helped a lot
Good
because he
balance.
was like, yeah, he was like, okay, take a step back. Like I
Mm.
know we don't want to rush into anything. We want to do our research. Like he is a lot more like I think you said your founder is like very meticulous with like spreadsheets and everything. That's my husband. So I think with him like he needed to see all the options as much as we thought we were seeing the options. And so yeah, I think it's like looking back, it's like we did take the time to look at things and like talk to people and really think about what we were doing. And I think that that's so important because it's such a huge step and such a huge journey in itself. And I think going into surrogacy, it's extremely overwhelming with the time period of it because you think ahead, like, oh my God, you have this much time to match. And then after you match, it's X amount of time before you even start. And I think you just can't
Can't
worry
wait to.
about how yeah, like you can't like I was like, oh God, I just need to get started because it's gonna
Right.
be, another year before we can even like try to have a baby. So it's just get that you can get bogged down in that, I think. And I think sometimes like taking that break
Mhm.
and just taking a step back and realizing like if I put a little more patience into this, it might make everything go a little more smoothly ahead of time. But I know that's probably one of the most impossible things to do when you're so desperately waiting for a child.
Yeah.
But yeah, and it's much easier for me to say that in hindsight because like during the moment I did not want to wait at all.
Right.
So I think just trying to accept sometimes that you don't have full control, even though
I
you
think
want
if you
to.
think about the fact that, like, yes, it is a long journey, but that's a long time to be working so closely with this agency and
Yeah.
carrier who's going to be helping you grow your family.
Right.
You want to have
Right.
the best
Exactly.
experience you can for the next year. So take a little bit
Right.
longer to research and look at all of your options, right? And make sure you're really
Yeah.
comfortable with the team.
100%.
And yeah.
Yeah. And I
Um,
think it's worth doing the research and feeling comfortable with it ahead of time, even if it takes a little extra time, than rushing into it and then feeling like you don't have all the support or answers or whatever that you really thought you wanted.
right.
So yeah.
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 And you can find, like I said, everything you need to know about over 50 top surrogacy agencies on GoStork, including all the prices. So
Yeah.
that's another way people save money is doing their
Yeah.
research in advance. Look at all the costs. We have the only place where you can see all the costs for all the surrogacy agencies with a detailed breakdown of all the fees. So we know intended
Yeah.
parents are saving money just looking at our cost template and looking at that versus everything else about the agency to make a more holistic decision about what they're moving
Yeah.
forwards with. So just take a few extra minutes and, or days. It's, you're still going to
Yeah.
work
I
on building
think,
your family. So
yeah, I think that's what it is too. Like I feel like that the cost aspect of your website is like a gigantic help that I didn't, that I think would be helpful to anyone because for us when we were looking at the agencies, you don't really get the information about costs until you meet with them or until
mhm.
you go further into it. And so it like if that was the only way to get the cost information, it takes months to get all the
Mhm.
information gathered and compare even just a few. And so the idea that you could look in one place and see all the costs to me is so amazing because that does save a lot because it significantly changes like how much the agency charges themselves. Like if, do they use a therapist? Do they mandate that you use their therapist? Like that matters because then they decide how much that therapist gets paid, not you. Like you don't have you know what I mean? Like we
Right.
didn't think about that. Like we knew that she was going to have a therapist. We knew that she was going to have someone like a nutritionist. We knew she was going to have all these things, but we didn't know that the agency was the one that decided who would be in each of those categories, which meant that we had even less control over the cost of things.
Right.
And so I think like that's important too to look into.
Yeah. And I think,
And
just
so that's
going,
very
looking through the
helpful.
cost template, you can learn a lot about what's ahead. Like
Yeah.
the screening costs for the carrier. I mean, there's so many
Yes.
things in it that
Yeah.
just looking through it, you almost like learn more about the journey and what the different components are
Yeah.
that you might pay for or you might not pay for depending on the agency.
Yeah.
So just really
Yeah.
educational.
I agree.
So,
Yeah.
but
Perfect. Well,
thank
thank
you.
you
I
so
mean, I
much.
think, I just think doing your research is one of the biggest decisions you'll ever make. So I think that's
Yeah.
great advice. But obviously you have a beautiful family and we're so happy
Thank
for
you.
you about everything and love following your journey and now following, your journey now as a mom of two, but also still supporting everyone going through their process and their infertility. And it's just so generous how much time you put into that. So,
Well, thank you so much. And yeah, like if people, I know people like had questions, I think we got to a lot of the questions, but I think if people have questions or just want to continue the conversation, like, both of us are always around and you can always send like a direct message or just like reach out and
exactly.
always happy to continue this conversation. So
Yeah, I
yeah,
think
well,
that's,
thank you so much.
thank you. That's just what I was going to say. I think Alex is totally
Yeah.
open to hear from you. We're here
Yep.
anytime you have questions. Alex is at When Everybody Matters, obviously. And, um, look out for more exciting guests that we have joining our Instagram lives in the next few weeks.
Yeah.
And, just have a great rest of your day. Get back to your
Thank
cute
you.
little guys.
Yep. Thank you. Have a great day too. Thank you
Thank
so much for
you.
having me on here.
Thank you
Have a
so
good
much.
day.
Thank you for joining us. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.